Have the absolute support, and that means financial support also.
Gloria Browne-Marshall. She's a civil rights attorney, college professor, and playwright. And she's the author of She Took Justice, The Black Woman, Law and Power, 1619 to 1969. I am so glad to have you. I'm going to talk about you for a second before you say anything, because I need folks to understand who you are and how you are credible to talk about what we're going to talk about. So Gloria Browne-Marshall is a professor of constitutional law at John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York. There she teaches constitutional law, race and the law, evidence, gender and justice. Before that, she was at Vassar College teaching Africana studies. She is a civil rights attorney, and let me tell you what she's litigated. She's litigated for the Southern Poverty Law Center in Alabama, the Community Legal Services in Philadelphia, the National NAACP Legal Defense Fund. She addresses issues of law and justice nationally and internationally. She's been to Ghana and Rwanda and England and Wales and Canada and South Africa. And before the United Nations in Geneva, she has addressed issues of law and justice. All of that gives her the credibility to write the books that she writes and speak on the topics that she speaks on. So thank you. Thank you, Gloria. As an attorney, as a professor, as a playwright, as an author, for being here.
Thank you. And that long introduction makes me feel tired.
It ought to make you feel tired because you did all that.
But it's, to God be the glory. And I just appreciate the opportunity to use the skills as we've done throughout all of our legacy and history, to use the skills we have to take our community forward.
So I want to know, what is it like being you? You know, surrounded by the incidents of race and law and justice. I mean, what does that feel like on a regular basis?
I'm just a normal person who early on decided, through my own experiences, I was bused across town. And I was bused when at the end of mandatory segregation, when it was ending and people were still being bused but having lawsuits forcing it to happen. So Brown versus Board of Education was 1954. But busing really to certain places like my hometown didn't happen until the 70s and 80s. And so, so that was the problem in a way. My parents were like, oh, we want a better education, we're going to send you across town. And they don't know they made me into an activist by sending me across town. I think that had a lot to do with it. When I saw the disparities in treatment, when it wasn't so much I suffered physical abuse, it was just the emotional, sense of place. And so it gave me more of a purpose. I won't say that instantly I knew I was a civil rights attorney, because I always wanted to be a writer. And so I would write plays and write stories even as a child. And one of those big old fashioned heavy typewriters they had back then, Olivetta or whatever. And so I wanted to do all these things, but I didn't know that the world allowed you to do more than one thing. And so when I found out I could do more than one thing at the same time, then it's like, that's great. Now just let me get started.
I really want to dig into this book because it's really important. I just don't think we get the depth of or understand really what women have done in this society. It's really hard to read the book and not be moved by the stories of these amazing, these extraordinary, these Black women who fought against prejudice, fought against racial oppression, fought against racial laws and racist laws. I mean, it does give you pause to think that they lived through it. Not all of them did, but lived a life that gave us what we have now. And I know we're still struggling. We're still trying to figure it out. But my goodness, the contributions that they made and are making, is worth telling the story for sure. Tell me why this book needed to be written.
Well, back when I was a civil rights attorney, and I was in these little towns in Alabama and Georgia that, basically there was nothing to do after I finished working on my case and meeting with the parents. And I would be in these motels, not hotel, motels.
Mm.
And as I'm sitting in these motels and there's nothing else to do except watch television, I would ask myself, how long have we been doing this? How long have activists been coming together trying to fight for our rights using law? And so I decided, since there's nothing else for me to do except work on my case and write, and I always wanted to be a writer, I said, I'm going to write a book about this. So I started writing Race, Law, and American Society. And as I wrote and researched that book, I saw these women. And so once I finished my Race, Law, and American Society book, 1607 to present, I went back and said, I'm going to go back and I'm going to focus just on these women, because it's like, why haven't I heard of this? Even Sojourner Truth. I've heard of Sojourner Truth, but I didn't know she brought 4 lawsuits.
Right. Who knows that? Nobody knows that until we read it. We don't know that.
In the 1800s, and won every one of them. So it just, every time I would go back another century to the 1700s, then I would find myself in the 1600s. And one thing I didn't want to do, I did not want to start in slavery. So I said, we're going to start in Africa. And that's when I began the book with Queen Nzingha, so that people would know that these skills we have today, we've always had these skills. They didn't, become part of who we are because of the civil rights movement or because of integrated education. We always had this in our DNA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you. Absolutely. I am glad that you didn't start so much. It took us so long to start with slavery. So now we do talk about slavery. But there's so little about the queens that were brought here, the queens that were sacrificed to be enslaved here. So I'm glad you started there. Tell me some of the stories. I mean, we talk about how you started, but tell me some of the other women's stories that we should be aware of. Some of them, we know their names, but it's amazing how history gets written sometimes, that it overlooks sometimes some of the most important parts of the lives that we should know. So what was your favorite?
I kind of go back to, I like starting with Mary and Anthony Johnson in the 1600s, because here we have this Black woman who is the only woman on this farm. And so she has her pick of all the men, and she's African, has come over in the Middle Passage. So she survived being stolen, kidnapped, forced on a slave ship. Here she is working in Virginia. She learns the language, she learns the culture, everything, gets her husband, and she and her husband work together. So I like that story of family, that even despite all of these things, we still created family, and that she and her husband had European and African servants of their own. They had land of their own. So she was like the very beginning, you start thinking of it, of that middle upper class Black that we have today. They can trace their roots all the way back to Mary and Anthony Johnson and Mary Johnson. I like Elizabeth Mum Bet. Here we have Mum Bet, who brings a lawsuit. Her evil mistress tries to attack her little sister. Mom Bet puts out her arm and this hot iron strikes down, as they say, to the white meat. And so here Mom Bet then gets sick and with infection and she starts getting better. Her arm has got this huge, ugly scar on it, but she's still talking about serving food, like the mistress, like serve the food at the table. So here she's serving the food. She takes off the bandage so everybody at the table can see this gash in her arm. And her mistress is like, no, cover that up. Nobody wants to see that. She says to her mistress, no, they're all going to see what you did. This is the same woman, Mom Bet, this enslaved woman who hears them talking about the Massachusetts Constitution in 1781, walks into a lawyer's office and hires a lawyer to bring a lawsuit in 1781. So here we have her bring this lawsuit and wins. And she changes her name after she wins to Elizabeth Freeman and says if there's only 1 minute she could spend as a free person and she would die, she would have taken that 1 minute. So these are the types of women. Arcelia, who killed her master in the 1850s, beat him to death with a log, cut up his dead body and burned it and hid it in the back, buried it in a hole. And they caught her later because the guy she was interested in on the plantation sold her out. And she was heartbroken and confessed to the crime. They didn't have a body, confessed to the crime. So they now arrest her for murder. He had been, so this slave master, this 70-something-year-old man, and she was like 16, had been assaulting her. She had given birth to his children, and he had come to her cabin one time too many, and she told him no and beat him with that log. She tried to tell her story in court. No person of color could testify in any case against a white person. No Asian, no Black person, no Latino, no Native American, no one. So they were the only ones who could tell their side of the story. And they ended up, of course, convicting her of murder and hanging her. But I think about the fact that her last words were, I didn't want to kill him. I just wanted it to stop. So when you start thinking about what these women did, and the reason why these stories are true and we know about them is because they write law down. And because they write it down, I'm able to go to these archives and these libraries, and a lot of things are digitized now, and gain these stories. And there are thousands more. So I'm just picking and choosing and trying to let people see, what we've been through and how we've fought back when the odds were against us.
I think what resonates so much with getting so deep into your book is the truth telling. We at the National Civil Rights Museum say, if you don't want the truth, don't hang with us. If you don't want to be surrounded by it and understand it and get some truth be told, don't hang with us, because we really do want to know and share the truth. And I think that's what this book does. Bring us a little closer to, we've gone through, what anybody a little closer. Let's get to the 1700s and the 1800s. Anybody in there that we need to know something about?
I mean, I think it would be very interesting when we look at Ida B. Wells Barnett, of course. When you think about Ida B. Wells Barnett and Memphis and what she did as far as starting off as a school teacher and getting on a first class train seat and buying a first class ticket, but being treated like a third class citizen, dragged off the train. And this goes to the tensions between white women and Black women that exist today. Those tensions began in the 1800s, before that because of slavery, but also in the 1800s when we had Black free women like Sojourner Truth, like Ida B. Wells Barnett, fighting for the right to vote. That was gained in 1920. Here's the problem. The white women did not want to fight alongside of the Black women. Right. And as a matter of fact, when Ida B. Wells Barnett had 3 of her male friends lynched because they owned a store that was competing with the white store. And so now Ida B. Wells writes this report that most of these lynchings are of Black women and children and men that have nothing to do with a white woman. And so this whole point of the tensions we have today between white women and Black women, even the white feminists and the Black feminists, and it's based in the fact that, we as Black women actually are the realization of equality. We are iconic figures who carved out our own place in the world, not based on what our men do. And this is what white women claim they want. That's what they claimed they wanted in the 1800s, 1900s, and in the 21st century. And we are that. We're the living embodiment of that. And yet, just like in the 1800s, they want to deny our power and make us want to or have to bend to their will. And so the issues that make us clash today, when you think about 56% of white female voters voted for Donald Trump, and and the 98% of black female voters voted for Joe Biden, you can see the ongoing political tensions that
Right.
started off in the 1800s during the suffragette movement and are still alive today.
Interesting. Now, you know my favorite, and I love all these stories, but I went looking for Fannie Lou Hamer. I went looking for her in here, and here she is. And I think, we know so much about Fannie Lou and how she fought to vote and how she lost everything to vote. But I don't think many people really understand how she was impacted as a woman, and being with forced sterilization. I don't think a lot of people have any idea of just how much this woman went through. Yes, the political side aside, the political side aside, and she was a warrior there. But that piece about the sterilization really does hit you in a different place. Can you talk a little bit about Fannie?
I think the part that's so sad about the sterilization is she didn't know.
Right, she didn't.
She didn't know. And they used to call it a Mississippi appendectomy, that you would go into the doctor's office, they would put you under, and you didn't know the doctor, these white doctors, was giving black women sterilization or being sterilized. And here's the part that's this: during the time period of enslavement, the black female body was used to produce the labor force. So they wanted black women to have babies. And then slavery ends in 1865, and they're like, we don't want any more black people anymore to maintain a white nation. And so they started sterilizing black women, experimenting on black women's bodies. All of these things were going on, but they were going on with other women of color, but primarily for us. And so, unfortunately, to this day, we're finding out there are forced sterilizations going on right now of women who are caught on the border. So that's how these things work together. You start to see history repeating itself. So Fannie Lou Hamer is trying to have children, and she's thinking it's the stress of the civil rights movement. She's thinking it's because she's not spending enough of that quality time with her husband. All these things. It's not until later she finds out she's been sterilized. And the devastation, you can just imagine the devastation of that she never knew. She thought it was something wrong with her all this time, and to find out that she was, and they didn't stop sterilizing people in this country until the 1970s, late 1970s. They were still doing it in North Carolina. And so, when I choose these women, I try to get people who are indicative of a particular era or an issue, but also they represent so many others.
Right.
We know about Fannie Lou Hamer, but I want to see the other side, like you said, the woman side, because she took justice, the black woman, law and power. And I use the black woman as a collective to show our journey. And that's why I capitalized the black woman, to show us as a collective group in our journey.
In 1964, what did Fannie Lou say? I am tired. I'm so sick and tired of being sick and tired. Well, it's 2021.
Yes.
I am so sick and tired of being sick and tired. And there's a lot to say grace over here. There's a lot to consider with what Black women have gone through in history. It is American history, though. I know it is absolutely African American, Black history. It is absolutely that. But the point of it is also that this is the history of this country, and to include that as a part of it and own it and claim it is something that we need to push more and talk more about, because I don't want it to be excluded as if it's something totally separate and didn't happen here. It happened.
It happened here, and I think that's the issue that people have. that they don't want their own relatives to be part of it. When I see the lynchings, and there have been, I named the women, not all of them, but a
Yes.
number of women, Black women who were lynched in my book. And I don't want people to think because it involves law that it's hard to read. It's very accessible.
No.
These are stories that are being told. And I try to tell the story in a storytelling fashion. But in between the stories, I put the names of the Black women who were lynched that year. And you look at this and you go, well, if this is all they say, all about a Black man after a white woman, then why are you here lynching a Black woman? So I think about going up until the 1960s. I think about Gloria Richardson. She's one of
Mm,
my favorites. Now
mm,
she's in Cambridge, Maryland, and she represents, as so many of these women do, history that they're foisted into. You're minding your own Black woman business, and then something comes up and pushes you into history. And Black women have had to say, like everybody else, we just want to go home. We just want to work our jobs. We just want to have fun. We just want to be with our loved ones. And history will stop at your doorstep and say, no, we choose you. And Black women have stood up. We've stepped up and we've made it happen. And Gloria Richardson was one of those people. She got involved in history because the segregation in Maryland, you think of Maryland being segregated that way in the 1960s? And here she is, that famous picture of her moving a bayonet that's pointed with this giant, knife on it, moving that away from her face as these National Guardsmen are standing there looking like they're about to attack the Black people who are protesting. And then she becomes, rising up as a Black woman, the leader of this group, and sitting down with Bobby Kennedy, negotiating the Peace Treaty of Cambridge. That's what it was called. So we're going all the way back from Queen Nzingha. Here we are again, negotiating a peace treaty in the midst of our own country, a peace treaty. And that's what it was with Bobby Kennedy at the table. And so I had a chance, and these are some of the beautiful moments, to send her an inquiry. Would you please, give me some information? Look over my chapter. Make sure it's accurate. She changed the spelling of one word. One word. That is, can you imagine the joy I would have as a writer? I was so nervous. She changed the spelling of one word and said everything else was fine and accurate, and that is how it happened. So that's what I want people to get from this, that these women, the ones who are still alive, are human beings, and that the next generation can do this work too.
and that their stories need to be told. There's an awful lot of women in this book that nobody knows anything about. An awful lot of them, an awful lot of them. There were many of them that I learned about that feel that we need to highlight a whole lot more in some of the programming, because we are, always pushing out, significant stories so that folks have a real understanding of what's going on. Help us understand why we're dealing with what we're dealing with, what they dealt with even before we, think that our lives are so tough right now, and to see what through history, these women have done to even get us to where we are now. Shirley Chisholm. So, I have, before there was a, Kamala Harris, there was a Shirley Chisholm for sure, and was always interested in Shirley Chisholm's story and how she pushed forward, and how people treated and thought about her in the positions that she was working toward. And that's how she got to be the first congressman, because she got out there and she took that. She took it, didn't she? She showed that you don't have a whole lot more choice than to get me, because I'm ready for this. What about Shirley Chisholm?
Well, I'm going to tell a story that people know and the people don't know.
There you go. Let's do that.
One Shirley Chisholm, the first Black U.S. representative. If you think about, Brooklyn had the largest Black population in the United States, and no representation in Congress, because they would change the districts around, so they would always end up a way in which they could dilute the Black vote. And so my mentor, who's gone on now, the story you don't know, is her name was Jocelyn Clopton Cooper. And so the first case to redistrict Brooklyn was Cooper versus Power. and Power was the name of the election official. And so my mentor and her husband and a group of others sued the election officials in order to redistrict Brooklyn. And so that case, Power, Brooklyn of Cooper versus Power, became the first case, and then another case expanded beyond that. And from that case rose Shirley Chisholm to become the first Black female U.S. representative. But we also need to understand this about Shirley Chisholm. She began as a school teacher, and her people were originally from Barbados. And so when people hear about a school teacher, you can think about, wow, school teachers used to be politicians. She was part of the first Congressional Black Caucus. We think about Congressional Black Caucus like it's always been there. It wasn't. The Congressional Black Caucus and all of those Black politicians we know about now grew out of this sense of the 1965 Voting Rights Act that needed to happen. We think about Aurelia Browder. And people used to say, Aurelia Browder, oh, we stand on your shoulders. And Aurelia Browder, who passed on, was nearly 100 years old, if not older, said, get off my shoulders and get to work. And so when you think about these women who've done so much to make our foundation stronger, we have to realize that Shirley Chisholm couldn't have been Shirley Chisholm if there hadn't been other Black women in politics rising up, each one only getting so far. Because then Shirley Chisholm goes on to run for president of the United States.
Yes.
Yes. And unbought and unbossed. It's like those are the think about a Black woman saying they're unbought and unbossed. I mean, that is just something only we can really say and mean it. And people know when we say it that we mean it. So I think that was just a fantastic way of looking at it. And so many of these women have such, they drove me crazy. I'm going to say this, that these women, yes, and I'm going to tell you because I wrote another book and a play in the time it took me to write this one, because every time I would put the book down and I would get frustrated because I would present it to publishers and I was told, oh, nobody wants to read about them. Nobody cares about that. I was told of this again and again, and I would just get frustrated. I'd go work on another project, and these women would say, "You better pick this up." Wait a minute. I mean, they would boss me around. The characters and subjects in this book would come to my mind saying, Queen Nzingha saying, "Excuse me," it's like, we finished this book, so these women have, even to this day, very strong personalities. So you can imagine how they were back then, the stronger the personality. But not only did we have to attack law, because law has been a weapon of oppression more than it's ever been a tool of liberation. So when Black women not only brought these lawsuits in the 1600s, two quick stories. One, we were in the Salem witch trials. That's another thing people don't know, that there were 3 Black women in the Salem witch trials, Tituba, Candy Black, and Mary. And the way they survived the Salem witch trials when other Black men and white men and women were being hanged as witches. They said, oh, you cannot allow a witch to live. And so I have actual testimony, trials, transcript testimony from the hearing when they were questioned as witches. And they realized in order to live, they had to admit they were witches. Because if they denied they were witches, only a witch would deny she's a witch. However, if she claims she is a witch and then can be saved, her Christian soul can be saved, then she can live. So these Black women, how do we navigate to this day? We have to figure out, what are we dealing with? If they're killing white women who say they're not witches, and so they said they were, that's how they lived. And so there are so many ways in which a lot of these women did not live, but so many others figured out how they could. And then others like Celia sacrificed their lives and said, you know what? I know I'm going to live, I'm going to die. I'm probably not going to live through this, but I'm going to say what I have to say. And you have women who, just said, they're going to kill me. They're going to kill me with dignity. I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to beg them for my life. I am just going to take the punishment they're giving me, knowing that they'll get their, come up later on in another world. But so many of these women sacrifice themselves, and we have to realize that as well.
Yeah, and I want everybody to know that they can get your book, on our website, civilrightsmuseum.org. get the book so you can understand these stories that we're talking about. civilrightsmuseum.org. We'll also put it in the chat, the link in the chat, so folks can go directly to our store. What I'd like to do is bring it even more forward. After spending some time with the stories of these women. And when I say spending time, it's hard to just do a quick read, although it is an easy read. It's an easy, like you didn't become a lawyer on us. We understood everything that you said, didn't have to go get a glossary. And you told the stories in a way that were effective for any reader. And I appreciate that, because I love to read and I don't feel like dissecting all the time. I want to just get to the meat of the story. And you did that throughout in telling the story of these women. The most important part of it is that you gave us what was most important that we should know about each one of them. So what is it about us knowing about these women, and they kind of own so much of different things that we've been exposed to? What is it that we as today's Black women, what do we need to do, and how should we be inspired? We still just ordinary women trying to do something, but what is it about what we read here that should impact us so much?
That these are ordinary women too.
Yeah.
Presented with extraordinary circumstances, and either choosing to or being forced into taking a stand. My favorite is Daisy Bates.
Yeah.
And here we have Daisy Bates in Little Rock, Arkansas, whose mother was killed fending off white rapists. And that's something we don't talk about, because we didn't get this shade by accident. And for the longest time, the failure of prosecutors to this day to prosecute has been ongoing. This country has a criminal justice system that was rooted in slavery and putting down Native American uprisings. Night riders, bounty hunters, that became our police department. But on the other side, the prosecutor's office were the ones to prosecute people of color, especially African Americans, and not prosecute the whites who harmed us. That's what we still have today. So when you have Black women being presented with what they know is a crooked criminal justice system,
yes,
and they're going to decide to say, I know that the fates and the forces aren't with me, but God is, and I am going to go do what I need to do. And so you have Daisy Bates, who helped those children integrate Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. She was sued. The case went up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they wanted to have the list of all the names of people who belong to the NAACP. Now, you know what they were going to do with those names if they got them.
Right.
It would be a hit squad. And so, the fact that she refused to give those names, she ended up losing her business. They had a newspaper business. No white people would take any ads. She ended up losing her business and almost lost her house. So when you think about Harry and Harriet Moore in Florida, blown up in their own homes on Christmas Day, you think about the activists who have sacrificed, and I say they were just regular people and we're just regular people. What separates most people from those people in this book? Courage. And courage is not something that you have to buy or sell. Courage is doing something you really don't want to do, and you don't have to do it fearlessly. You can have fear, and I'm sure they did too. You can be that Harriet Tubman, just decide that it's worth it and use the courage that we all have innately inside of us. And courage is not the lack of fear. Courage is having that fear and doing it anyway. And these are the women who had the fear that we have as regular people, but they decided to do it anyway, to step forward anyway, to take on the challenge, even though they know that the issues, the law and society were against them. But that's how they became worthy. And we're not trying to say that everybody has to be a warrior. I even say people can be weekend warriors. Keep that day job. We need people with money. Keep that day job, pay those bills. But on the weekends, use that skill gained by what you do every day and use it on the weekend. And that's what people in the civil rights movement did. A lot of them were, if they couldn't participate themselves, then they wrote a check. You know, they helped hand out flyers. They participated in any way they could. And I think that's what these women are telling us, that there are things that we can do beyond what we're doing. And we just have to decide to step out and do it.
One of the things that we talk about a lot at the National Civil Rights Museum is that every exhibit that we have has a modern day counterpart. These issues that we talk about in the 50s and 60s, you know, the historic civil rights movement, we're still dealing with so much of that. In this book, do you see the what's still going on now that is talked about with the lives of the women in the book?
Oh, definitely. I mean, you think about the fact that Kamala Harris is our Black female vice president, and that when you think about the fact that it's not a coincidence she's a lawyer, it's not a coincidence Michelle Obama is a lawyer. Because once we began to see that we could take this tool of oppression and make it a tool of liberation, this tool called law, because the law is what has been oppressing people. There are two ways oppression works in America: law and violence. And what we saw on January 6th, that lynch mob, those are the lynch mobs that used to come throughout American history, thousands of people going from one person in their house, dragging them out and hurting them. That is today. We saw it right in front of our eyes. They had a gallows set up on Capitol Hill. The other is law. We had the power of law. Black women, in my book, I talk about how Black women had organizing skills back in the 1800s. So they took those organizing skills, and that's why Black women are so organized politically today, because we have been organizing since the 1800s. When white women didn't let us into their groups, we started our own group. Ida B. Wells Barnett started her own group. And so we took those organizing skills. What happened after women gained the right to vote in 1920? A backlash against Black women. So what we need to learn is this: the same way we had Barack Obama, then we have Donald Trump. We need to understand we have Kamala Harris. Look for the backlash. We saw the Black political power that took place that put Joe Biden in office. What are we seeing now? The use of law to have voter suppression, to fill all those holes that gave rise to that Black political power. Same thing happened in the 1800s with Black men. Men gained the right to vote, Black men did, in 1870. We had Black U.S. senators, Black U.S. representatives. We had all that power. By 1890, they had a literacy test, grandfather clause, and poll tax. So what we need to gain from history, we need to be prepared for the backlash of violence and the backlash of law. And so this is what this book tells you. If you follow it, you see 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Are we prepared for the backlash that these women are basically telling us that this is what's going to happen? Or are we going to sit back and react to it and go, oh my God, I can't believe this happened? So history has told us the game plan. Are we going to step up with the courage to be a part of our protection and the solution? So we can do more than these women did, because they had far less. So we need to stop moaning and complaining and realize if these women could do what they did with far less, then there's a whole lot more we need to do.
I need you to say something again that you said, that this backlash, the backlash, say it again.
The backlash is coming. Each time there's progress going forward, there's a backlash, 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And history has shown us this backlash is real. When you see African-American power, as you saw in this election, and the political power, each time you see that power, look for the backlash.
The backlash of violence.
Violence and law.
And law. We've seen both of them. We've seen both of them this year.
We're going to see it focus more on us. We saw the backlash of violence and law when President Obama rose to office. The backlash of police attacks on Black people. And right now, you're seeing law around us where these state houses, conservatives, are trying to pass these voter suppression laws. You're going to see the backlash in violence because we don't know what police officers to trust. Once again, a police department that was created as slave catchers, bounty hunters, night riders, and now prosecutors who turned their back and did not even do anything to protect us. We still have that. That's still our criminal justice system. So to whom do we trust?
We are still trying to get anti-lynching laws passed. We are still trying to get these symbols of race and hate out of our Constitution. We're still trying to get slavery out of the Constitution. I think people think, oh, they're like, what? That's not still written anywhere. That's not still anything that somebody can pull. We can. You know, we can't be ignorant of this. We cannot. We have to absorb as much as we can and then see kind of where we find ourselves in it, right?
Yes. Oh, definitely. I mean, there are a lot of stories of success. Um, Black women who sued to stop poll taxes,
Yeah.
Black women who sued to stop literacy tests. One of the things I like, I have to say, my little conceit, I like a timeline. I
Mm.
like for us to look at, even just to look at the timeline and see how things go up and down, up and down. It's not straight across. So
Right.
people shouldn't rest on their laurels and think, oh, wow, we have this, and we'll look for the backlash. Are we prepared for the backlash? And so when I think about the Harriet Tubman, not just Harriet Tubman, the other Harriet, we have as many Harriets in here. We think about Harriet Tubman, and Harriet Tubman, I visited her house, I visited her gravesite. You know, I tried as often as I could to put myself in the shoes of where these people walked. And so when I visited, you see how humble they lived. I mean, how humble her place was, and I think about, she used to, not only was she the spy, was she the, conductor of the Underground Railroad, she also had a home for enslaved people who were had no place to go. They were homeless. So you're talking about a homeless shelter today. She had a homeless shelter back in the 1800s
Yeah.
where she used to help people. You think about the fact that you had so many of these women who thought about reparations. Callie House, for example. Callie House was working on reparations in the 1890s. She had an organization called the National Ex-Slave Mutual Relief Bounty and Pension Fund. So we didn't just start this today. All of these things are rooted somewhere previous to this. And I just really think it's fantastic that these women have shown themselves that we don't have to start from scratch. They've shown us that there's something that we can build on that's more powerful than any of us individually, that we have a collective spirit and a collective knowledge and a collective history. And that's why it's called the Black Woman Law and Power, because it's about the collective of Black women and the power that's in that.
It has been such a delight to talk to you and to dig deep into what the Black woman law and power is all about. You talk about it from 1619 to 1969. We went a little past 1969 because we know that power is still happening, and there's so many lives that we need to reflect on and see how they fit with what we're seeing today. It really does serve us well to understand what this is. It serves us well to really dig deep into it and know. There's somebody in there that's Faith Morris says, I can see myself in so many of them. I can see myself, and I think many of us would see ourselves in those stories just based on what it is that we're trying to do to live better lives, to make some kind of contribution to this nation. Is there any final word that you want to give us before we let folks rest?
Well, I started writing She Took Justice. I changed the subtitle many times, but She Took Justice was the title. And I knew that this was the book I was supposed to write, and this was supposed to be the title. When I was researching one of the lawsuits brought by Sojourner Truth, she brought 4 different lawsuits. And she says in this one quote, and I quote her in the book, if women want more rights than they got, then they need to just take them and not be talking about it. So I'd like to leave people with that thought.
Is that an actual quote?
That's an actual quote.
We need to use that quote.
Yes,
I love that quote. I love it. I'm gonna write it down. I'm gonna say as per.
Yes.
Absolutely. I think
yes.
It's phenomenal.
So that's what I really want. I mean, she's the one they say, oh, you escaped from slavery. No, she's quoted as saying, I didn't escape. I left in broad daylight. I didn't escape from slavery. I left. So when you the power and the courage and the beauty of these women is something that I wanted to capture in this book, and I'm glad that you gave me an opportunity to talk about them, because they are extraordinary, and there are so many I didn't talk about, and so many that didn't make it into the book, but there will be a book 2.
Well, I would hope so. I would hope so, because the story keeps going.
Yes.
You know, the story of Black women and the impact that Black women have had, you know, everywhere we are. We just happen to be talking about what's happening here and what happened prior to us happening here. But, you know, everywhere we've been, we have made such a tremendous mark. And thank God for us, honestly. Thank, you know, for the strength and the power and the energy and the tenacity and that we took it. I love that. They will be tired of me saying that over. I'm just taking it. Y'all not gonna put me out. I'm leaving.
Yes, I'm leaving.
Right.
Yes, in broad daylight.
Broad daylight.
When you think about Queen Nzingha died in her sleep at 80 years old, having spent her life, adult life, as a warrior, attacking the Portuguese who had invaded her country, who stole us, and were the 20 and odd Africans arriving in Jamestown in 1619. So when you think about the fact that she was so feared as a warrior and so respected as a diplomat, that the Portuguese actually have artistic friezes of her that I had a chance to look at.
Really?
Yes, that they created because of that respect they had for her as a warrior, as an adversary, and as a diplomat. And that's Queen Nzingha in the 1600s. She negotiated that peace treaty in 1622. So when we think about our intellectual gifts, think about our gifts of creativity, and of course, gifts of the hand, we have done so much for ourselves and for this country in our community, and we still have so much more to give.
We do, but we have it to give, and that's what's so wonderful about us. You know, women, period, but Black women, okay, yes. Thank you so much, Gloria Browne-Marshall, for what you've done, not just with this book, actually. I mean, your story is pretty interesting too, and that you have surrounded yourself with the impact of law and justice and women and the role that they had in it. But, you know, this whole gender and justice and evidence and race, I mean, you could just go on and on and on. And it's all something that we're very interested in here at the National Civil Rights Museum, and the folks that follow us are interested in it too. So thank you so much for sharing. Encourage everybody to get this book. It's a wonderful read. Telling folks, go to page 600, go to page 22, you know, because every time I see something, I tell somebody to go look for it, and we'll use it, you know, as a reference, as a resource, frankly, for folks to just be more knowledgeable about what Black women in America, you know, what really has happened with us, what we've done and what we've achieved, and how we've created this road for where we are now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm Faith Morris with the National Civil Rights Museum, and it has been my pleasure to talk about She Took Justice with author Gloria Browne-Marshall.